I have not turned on a stove in 21 years. I have not pressed a button, flipped a switch, or twisted a dial to cook a single meal since the spring of 2005. No gas line, no propane tank, no electricity, no microwave, no toaster, nothing that plugs in, nothing that runs on batteries, nothing that requires a monthly bill or a trip to a hardware store to maintain. And I eat better than I have ever eaten in my life. That is not nostalgia talking. That is not some romantic fantasy about living in the woods. I am telling you that the food I cook out here on this ridge in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, using methods that are between 200 and 10,000 years old, is better tasting, more nutritious, and more reliable than anything I ever made in a fully equipped kitchen in Pittsburgh. And the total cost of my entire cooking system, every tool, every surface, every piece of equipment I use to prepare 3 meals a day, 365 days a year, was $14. I want you to hold that number while I walk you through exactly how I do this, because by the end of this video, you will understand not just how to cook without modern utilities, but why the food industry and the appliance industry have spent decades convincing you that you cannot. Stay until the end, because the last method I am going to show you is something I discovered by accident that changed how I think about food preservation entirely. And when I tell you what it replaced, you will never look at your refrigerator the same way again. Let me start with fire. Not fire as a concept, not fire as a survival skill, fire as a precision cooking tool, because that is what it is, and that is what the modern world has trained you to forget. When you turn a dial on a gas stove, you are controlling a flame. That is all you are doing. You are adjusting the size of a flame to apply a specific amount of heat to a specific surface. A campfire does exactly the same thing. The difference is that a gas stove gives you a dial, and a campfire gives you physics. And physics is more precise than any dial ever built. The cooking fire I use every single day is not a campfire. It is a structured fire platform I built from flat stones I collected from a creek bed about 300 yards from my cabin. 22 flat stones, each roughly 2 to 3 inches thick, stacked and fitted into a U-shaped structure about 30 inches wide, 18 inches deep, and 14 inches tall. The open end of the U faces the prevailing wind, which up here comes from the southwest about 280 days a year. That is not an accident. That is the first principle of fire cooking that most people never learn. Your fire needs air. Specifically, it needs a consistent draft that feeds oxygen to the base of the coal bed without gusting hard enough to scatter your heat. A U-shaped structure with the opening facing into the prevailing wind creates a natural bellows effect. The wind enters the open end, compresses slightly as it hits the back wall, and circulates up through the coal bed. The stones absorb heat and radiate it inward from 3 sides. The result is a fire that burns hotter, more evenly, and with less fuel than any open campfire you have ever built. I burn about 1/3 less wood cooking on this platform than I did in the first year when I was cooking over an open fire on the ground. 1/3 less wood over 21 years is a mountain of timber I never had to cut. On top of the stone platform sits a flat piece of steel. This is where I spent money, and I do not apologize for it. It is a half-inch thick steel plate, roughly 24 by 16 inches, that I pulled from the bed of a scrapped pickup truck at a junkyard in the valley in 2005. Cost me $14. The junkyard owner thought I was crazy. That steel plate is my stove. It is my skillet. It is my griddle. It is my oven lid. It has cooked every meal I have eaten for 21 years, and it will cook every meal I eat for the next 21. A half-inch of carbon steel over a controlled coal bed gives you something a modern stove cannot. It gives you a thermal gradient. The center of the plate, directly over the hottest part of the fire, runs about 600 to 700 degrees. The edges, extending past the coal bed, sit at about 250 to 300 degrees. That means I have a screaming hot sear zone in the center and a low and slow warming zone on the edges, at the same time, on the same surface. No dials, no settings, no adjustment needed. I sear a piece of elk steak in the center, slide it to the edge to finish gently, and the result is better than anything you will get from a $3,000 range in a restaurant kitchen. I know because I have eaten in those restaurants. The food from this plate is better. Now, let me talk about what I actually cook, because there is a perception out there that living off the land means you eat the same three things in rotation until you lose your mind. That is not my experience. That is the experience of someone who does not know how to use what the mountain provides. In a typical week in late summer and fall, I am working with elk, deer, grouse, rabbit, trout, wild mushrooms, including chanterelles and boletes that grow in the pine forests around this ridge, wild onions, cattail root, dandelion greens, fireweed shoots, huckleberries, service berries, chokecherries, pine nuts, and whatever else the season hands me. In winter, the fresh variety contracts, but the preserved stores expand. Smoked trout, dried venison, rendered fat, fermented berries, pemmican. I eat a wider variety of foods across a full year than most Americans who have access to a supermarket. The USDA published a study in 2019 that found the average American rotates through the same 12 meals repeatedly. 12. I have more variety than that in a single week, and I have never once pushed a shopping cart. But let me get back to technique, because that is where the real knowledge lives. The stone platform and the steel plate handle about 70% of my cooking. The other 30% comes from two methods that are so old they predate written language, and so effective that I genuinely do not understand why they are not taught in every outdoor education program in the country. The first is pit cooking, not burying food in dirt, which is what most people picture when they hear the term. Real pit cooking is a thermal mass oven built into the ground. I dug a pit about 3 feet in diameter and 2 feet deep into the rocky soil next to my cabin. I lined it with flat stones. I build a fire in the pit and burn it down to a deep coal bed, which takes about 2 hours. Then I rake the coals to the sides, lay down a bed of green leaves, usually wild grape or large fern fronds, place whatever I am cooking on the leaf bed, cover it with more leaves, then place a flat stone lid over the top and pack dirt around the edges to seal it. What I have just built is a convection oven with perfect moisture retention, running at about 300 to 350 degrees. The thermal mass of the stone walls holds that temperature for 6 to 8 hours without adding a single additional piece of fuel. I have pit roasted an entire elk shoulder in this hole. 7 pounds of meat. 8 hours in the pit. When I pulled it out, the meat fell apart at the touch. The flavor was unlike anything you can achieve in a conventional oven, because the smoke from the initial burn, the moisture from the green leaves, and the even radiant heat from the stone walls create a cooking environment that no manufactured appliance can replicate. The stone walls do not have hot spots. There are no heating elements cycling on and off. The temperature does not fluctuate. It holds steady because thermal mass does not fluctuate. Physics again. The same principle that keeps my cabin warm in January keeps my pit oven cooking in October. The second method is the one that took me the longest to learn, and the one I now use more than any other in the cold months. Smoke cooking. Not grilling with smoke flavor. True low-temperature smoke cooking, where the smoke itself is the heat source and the preservation agent simultaneously. I built a smoke chamber from stacked logs and sealed it with the same clay and grass chinking I used on my cabin walls. It is about 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. At the base is a fire channel that runs about 6 feet from the fire pit to the chamber entrance. That distance is critical. The smoke and heat travel through the channel and arrive at the food at between 120 and 180 degrees, depending on how much wood I am burning. That temperature range is the sweet spot. Hot enough to cook slowly, cool enough to dry and preserve at the same time. I hang strips of elk, venison, or trout on wooden racks inside the chamber and smoke them for anywhere from 8 to 48 hours, depending on the thickness and what I am trying to achieve. A thick elk roast, smoked for 48 hours at 140 degrees, comes out with a bark on the outside that crunches when you bite it, and an interior that is tender, smoky, and will last for months without refrigeration. Months. I have eaten smoked trout in March that I put in the chamber the previous September, and it was perfect. Not just edible, perfect. The wood you use for smoking matters more than almost any other variable. I use a mix of apple wood, which I cut from a wild apple tree about 2 miles down the valley, and alder, which grows along the creek. Apple gives sweetness. Alder gives a clean, mild smoke that does not overpower the meat. Pine is everywhere up here, but I never burn pine in the smoke chamber. Pine resin deposits a bitter tar on the meat that will make you sick. Every piece of softwood, pine, spruce, fir, cedar, contains resin that becomes toxic when it coats food at low smoking temperatures. This is something that kills people in survival situations. They smoke meat over pine because it is the only wood they can find, and they end up with digestive problems that can cascade into serious illness. Hardwood only, always. If you cannot find hardwood, you dry the meat in open air and skip the smoke entirely. Bad smoke is worse than no smoke. Now I want to address something that I know is going through your mind right now because it went through mine during my first winter up here. What about boiling? What about water? What about soup, stew, anything liquid? You cannot put a pot of water on a steel plate over a fire and expect it to work the same way as a burner on a stove. And you are right, it does not work the same way. It works better. I use a cast iron Dutch oven that I found at a yard sale in 2006 for $8. That Dutch oven is the single most versatile cooking tool I own. I set it directly into the coal bed, not on top of the plate, not on a grate, directly into the coals. I rake hot coals around the sides and on top of the lid. The heat surrounds the pot from every direction. A stew in that Dutch oven reaches a simmer in about 20 minutes and holds a perfect low bubble for hours, as long as I maintain the coal bed. The cast iron distributes heat so evenly that I have never scorched a pot of stew in 21 years. Try that on an electric stove. The hot spots on a modern electric burner will burn the bottom of a pot in minutes if you are not stirring constantly. My coal bed does not have hot spots. The heat is ambient, omnidirectional, and self-regulating because a coal bed cools slowly and predictably. Bread. I bake bread twice a week. Have done so for the last 19 years, since I got the technique dialed in. The method is older than civilization. You make a dough from flour, which is the one thing I do buy from town, water, salt, and a sourdough starter I have kept alive since 2007. That starter is 18 years old. It lives in a clay crock on a shelf in my cabin. I feed it once a week with fresh flour and water. It has survived freezing temperatures, neglect, and one incident where I accidentally left the lid off for 3 days and found a layer of mold on top. I scraped the mold off, stirred the starter underneath, fed it, and it came back to life within 24 hours. A healthy sourdough culture is nearly indestructible. The yeast and bacteria in that crock have been providing me with leavened bread for almost 2 decades, and they will continue to do so for as long as I keep feeding them. The bread itself I bake in the Dutch oven. I let the dough rise for 8 to 12 hours near the warmth of the cabin stove, then drop it into the preheated Dutch oven, put the lid on, bury the whole thing in coals, and walk away for 45 minutes. The bread that comes out has a thick, dark crust that cracks when you tear it open, and a soft, chewy interior with a tang from the sourdough that no commercial bakery can touch. I eat it with rendered bear fat or elk tallow spread on top instead of butter. The flavor is richer than any butter I have ever had. Here is the part I have never told anyone. The thing I discovered by accident in my 3rd winter up here that I have never seen in a single survival manual, homesteading book, or cooking guide of any kind. It has to do with preserving food without smoking, without drying, without salt curing, and without any refrigeration whatsoever. In December of 2007, I had a surplus of rendered elk fat stored in a clay pot. I had cooked a batch of shredded smoked elk that I was planning to eat over the next few days. I mixed the shredded meat into the pot of warm liquid fat almost without thinking, just to keep it all in one container. I set the pot in the cold corner of my cabin, where the temperature stays between 35 and 40 degrees in winter, and I forgot about it. Life happens. A storm came in. I was busy cutting firewood for 3 days. When I came back to that pot, the fat had solidified around the meat into a dense block. I chipped some out, warmed it over the fire, and ate it. It was perfect. A week later, I ate more. Still perfect. A month later, 2 months, 3 months. I finally finished that pot in late March. nearly 4 months after I had packed it, and the last bite tasted exactly like the first. What I had accidentally done was make a version of confit. The French have been doing this for at least 500 years. The English potted meat the same way for centuries before refrigeration existed. The principle is simple, and it is backed by decades of food science. Fat is an anaerobic sealant. When you submerge cooked meat fully in rendered fat and allow it to solidify, you create an airtight barrier that prevents oxidation and inhibits bacterial growth. The meat is preserved not by temperature, but by the absence of oxygen. The USDA's own research on traditional fat preservation methods confirms that properly rendered animal fat with a moisture content below 1% creates a preservation environment that can keep cooked meat safe for 3 to 6 months at temperatures below 45 degrees without any refrigeration. My cold corner sits at about 37 degrees in winter. I was within the safe zone without knowing it. Since that accident, I have preserved hundreds of pounds of meat this way. Elk, venison, grouse, rabbit, trout, all of it shredded or portioned, submerged in rendered fat in clay pots, stored in the cold corner. I have effectively replaced a refrigerator with a clay pot and animal fat. The cost of this preservation system is zero. The reliability is absolute. I have never had a single batch go bad in 18 years of using this method. Not one. Now think about what I just told you. The American refrigerator market is worth $14 billion a year. The average refrigerator costs $1,500 and lasts 12 years. It runs 24 hours a day, consuming between 400 and 800 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. Over a 50-year adult lifetime, you will buy 4 or 5 refrigerators at a total cost of roughly $7,500 and spend another $3,000 to $5,000 powering them. Call it $12,000 over a lifetime to keep food cold. I keep food preserved in a clay pot full of elk fat. My cost is zero. My failure rate is zero. My dependency on a power grid that can fail, a compressor that can break, or a supply chain that can collapse is zero. The method I use was standard practice in every human civilization on Earth until roughly 1930, when General Electric began marketing the home refrigerator as a necessity of modern life. Before that, every family in the Northern Hemisphere knew how to preserve meat in fat, every single one. That knowledge disappeared in a single generation. Not because it stopped working, because someone figured out how to sell you a machine to replace it. I want to lay out the full picture of what I have just described, so the scale of it hits you properly. My entire cooking system consists of a stone fire platform I built from creek rocks in an afternoon, a steel plate I bought for $14 from a junkyard, a fire pit oven dug into the ground and lined with flat stones, a smoke chamber built from stacked logs and sealed with clay, a cast iron Dutch oven I bought used for $8, and a clay pot full of animal fat. Total cost, $22. That system has fed me 3 meals a day for 21 years. It has never broken. It has never needed a part replaced. It has never required a fuel delivery, a utility connection, or a service call. It runs on wood that falls from the trees around my cabin and fat from the animals I hunt on my own land. The average American kitchen contains between $8,000 and $15,000 worth of appliances: a gas range, a refrigerator, a microwave, a toaster, a coffee maker, a dishwasher. Each one requires either electricity, gas, or both. Each one has a design life of 8 to 15 years. Each one will be replaced multiple times over a lifetime. The total lifetime cost of equipping and powering an American kitchen is somewhere north of $50,000. And the food that comes out of that kitchen, according to the USDA's own dietary surveys, is less nutritious than what Americans ate in 1950, before most of these appliances existed in the average home. I am not against technology. I carried steel and iron up this mountain because steel and iron are the right tools for the job. What I am against is dependency. Dependency on systems you do not control, that charge you monthly for the privilege of eating, that break down on a schedule designed to generate replacement sales, and that have convinced 3 generations of people that cooking over fire is primitive, when it is in fact the most sophisticated thermal engineering available to a human being. A coal bed is more precise than a burner. A smoke chamber is more effective than a refrigerator. A pit oven is more even than a convection oven. These are not opinions. These are measurable physical properties that anyone with a thermometer can verify. If you have ever stood in your kitchen watching a repair technician shake his head at your stove or your refrigerator or your dishwasher and hand you a bill for $400 to fix a machine that cost $800 and is 6 years into a 10-year life, I want you to think about what I just told you. $22, 21 years, 0 failures. The next video is about water, how I get unlimited clean drinking water on this mountain, without a well, without a pump, without a filter, and without paying a single dollar to anyone. The system cost me $5 and a weekend of digging. If you think the cooking story was something, you have not seen anything yet.